Public Relations. Edward L. Bernays. 1945. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 1. The Growth of Public Relations. 13. Extent of today's public relations. It is pertinent at this point to survey the field to see just how public relations has grown, penetrated, and influenced many of the most important areas of modern life. Perhaps the logical approach is to begin with the increase in number of practitioners, though that is not easy. The nomenclature, the titles of men and women who do public relations, are not set by law or custom. As we have seen, people who do public relations work may not even have a descriptive appellation. Then, too, the name applied to the activity itself and the changes it has undergone make it quite difficult to use the term so that it will have the same meaning for everyone. There are broad indications, however, that the number of practitioners in public relations has increased phenomenally as regards both individuals engaged in or with various firms or organizations and the Independent Council on Public Relations. There are no official figures, but a public relations directory and yearbook, the first, published in 1945, none have been published since, attempts to list people who call themselves public relations men or women. This book lists 455 independent public relations practitioners in 65 cities in 24 states, and 3,870 public relations directors employed by business firms, 1,216 employed by trade and professional groups, and 588 by social service, religious, and other non-profit groups. These numbers, it seems to me, only skim the surface. Today there are undoubtedly many, many more. In the 1950 Manhattan Classified Telephone Directory, 394 names were listed under public relations, whereas in 1935 only 10 names were listed. That does not necessarily mean that all these persons are public relations counsel according to our definition, under the heading, Publicity Service Bureaus. 235 names were listed in 1950, 76 in 1935. In one field alone, that of motion pictures, the 1950 Yearbook of Motion Pictures, under the caption Publicity Public Relations, lists 87 individuals or firms engaged in public relations. It is equally difficult to estimate the fees of independent public relations counsel. In the matter of charging, fees vary as they do in other professional fields. They are dependent on the earning power of the organization, and the field it specializes in. Sometimes independent public relations counsel get an overall fee that includes all their expenses. In other cases, the expenses are charged to the client. Advertising Age, an advertising weekly, estimated a few years ago that the top public relations counsel in New York and Chicago shared fees in excess of $3 million a year. The growth of associations is a good indication of the evolutionary state of development of any profession. That men and women get together for an interchange of information, points of view, and sociability indicates a common interest greater than their competitive interest. The growth of such organizations shows a move toward professionalization. In the 1930s, as has been related, an abortive attempt was made by a number of us to form an organization of public relations men. Advanced publicity and editor and publisher created such internal jealousies, however, that the effort fell apart. Quite different was an activity in the 30s to organize a council on public opinion following the pattern of the Council on Foreign Affairs. I was chairman of this group, that met at irregular intervals to discuss topics of mutual interest. Henry Luce, Will Hayes, and others talked to us. Academic men who were studying the field of public opinion and practical men cooperated in this first effort to unite these two phases. The existence of this group for several years indicated that there was a broad area of joint action and interest between professionals and academicians. Since those earliest days, a number of public relations organizations have sprung up in the United States and Europe, on a national and community basis, cutting across varied activities, as well as covering special fields of interest: education, libraries, finance, social service, and motion pictures. The largest of these organizations, established on a nationwide basis, is the Public Relations Society of America, a 1948 merger of the American Council on Public Relations and the National Association of Public Relations Counsel, which, from 1936 until 1944, had functioned as the National Association of Accredited Publicity Directors. With headquarters in New York, it has chapters in Chicago, Dallas, Detroit, Honolulu, Los Angeles, St. Louis, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and other cities, and publishes the monthly Public Relations Journal. Another national organization, the American Public Relations Association, has chapters in a number of cities. In its charter, the Public Relations Society of America lists a wide range of activities that it promises to enter, everything from interpreting the field to the public to providing facilities and opportunities for research. There appear to be educational and character qualifications necessary for membership. Present-day public relations organizations are likely to become trade organizations unless they establish more powerful sanctions to uphold professional standards for their members and for the group as a whole. Maybe such standards will come only from state licensing. It is regrettable, too, that these groups grew out of promotions by promoters rather than from a need felt by the members of the field. The growth, development, self-recognition, and self-consciousness of public relations is indicated by the increase in groups that represent special interests. The American College Public Relations Association, with some 800 members drawn from the public relations personnel of colleges and universities. Prior to 1946 it was named the American College Publicity Association, which originated in 1917 as the American Association of College News Bureaus, the National School Public Relations Association, from the School Public Relations Offices and Public School Systems, the Financial Public Relations Association, organized from among banks, trust companies, investment houses, and the like, with 1,200 members, the National Publicity Council for Health and Welfare Services, which tries to stimulate and develop better interpretation of social problems and social work, with some 2,000 members, agencies and individuals, local publicity or public relations clubs, such as the Publicity Club of New York and the 50 Club of Los Angeles, the Association of Municipal Public Relations Officers, and the Committee on Publicity Methods of the National Conference of Social Work. All these groups show a desire to exchange information and point of view, and at the same time, to advance the field. Organization and clarification of aims and objectives have taken place in Europe, too. Their development in this field came only recently. The reasons were Europe's greater conservatism, greater rigidity in patterns of conduct, the existence of cartels which inhibit flexibility in business, and the centralized, dominating control of many capital cities. In totalitarian countries, naturally, there was not and could not be any public relations as we know it because social control is authoritarian. The Institute of Public Relations was founded in England and followed the American pattern, except that it started where we were some 30 years ago. It puts its main emphasis on the public relations officer, whom it considers to be a one-way conduit of information to the public. Possibly this attitude is due in part to the hierarchic system in England. Men at top levels do not want any advice from subalterns concerning policy. They are, nevertheless, willing to use their public relations officer to reach a more and more vocal public. The Institute represents such cross-sections of interest as the Association of Optical Practitioners, the Bluer Society, the North Thames Gas Board, the London Press Exchange, and the British Rayon Federation. The younger pioneers in England are trying to remedy their present status of being rather remote from the basic policy councils of their clients or employers. There is a Netherlands Public Relations Society, headed in 1950 by a professor of journalism, former advisor to the Prime Minister, and a French Public Relations Society and a Norwegian Public Relations Society are referred to in the British Institute of Public Relations Journal. An International Public Relations Society has also been proposed as a general binder for groups all over the world. The growing literature on public relations is another valid index of public interest, self-consciousness, and growing status. As the principles and practices that govern a vocation are made known through its literature, they become useful to all and form a firmer basis for the advancement of the field. The first bibliography on the general subject, a list of references on publicity with special references to press agents, was published by the Library of Congress in 1921. In 1924, Everett G. and Mary Routson, of the Russell Sage Foundation, issued a pamphlet entitled Publicity Methods Reading List. Its very title indicates that the concept of public relations had not penetrated in the period, and the sparsity of what it covered showed how little literature there was. In fact, there were only 6 full-length books that even vaguely covered the subject of public opinion: The Behavior of Crowds, by Everett Dean Martin, published in 1920, The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, published in 1908, Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann, published in 1922, Public Opinion and the Steel Strike, by the Commission of Inquiry, Interchurch World Movement, published in 1921, Public Opinion and Popular Government, by A. Lawrence Lowell, revised in 1914, and Public Opinion, in Proceedings of the National Conference of Social Work, published in 1923. Books about public relations or publicity were equally scarce. Only 4 books were listed under the techniques of publicity: my own book, Crystallizing Public Opinion, 1923, The Humanizing of Knowledge, by James Harvey Robinson, 1923, Publicity, by R. H. Wilder and K. L. Buell, 1923, and Publicity Methods for Engineers, 1922. Books as far off the subject as Newspaper Reading Habits of College Students, by George Burton Hotchkiss and Richard B. Frank in 1920, and The Psychology of Advertising in Theory and Practice, by Walter Dill Scott, 1921, were also listed in the pamphlet. It was not until 13 years later that Harwood L. Childs, who was giving a course in public opinion management at Princeton University, compiled a reference guide to the study of public opinion, which was published by the Princeton University Press. This same scarcity of material is indicated by a research of various bibliographical references. The Book Review Digest in 1915 showed no listing of any book on public relations, publicity, or public opinion. 6 years later, in 1921, 3 entries appeared under publicity and 6 under public opinion, none under public relations. The New York Public Library listed only 18 items under the joint heading of public relations, publicity, or public opinion in 1917. But between 1917 and 1925 this list included 28 titles. The real growth of the field is dramatically demonstrated by 2 bibliographies, both of them university publications. The first, an annotated bibliography titled Propaganda and Promotional Activities, by Harold D. Laswell, Ralph D. Casey, and Bruce Lawn Smith, published in 1935 by the University of Minnesota Press, covered about 4,500 items. In 1944 a companion volume, Propaganda, Communication, and Public Opinion, was compiled by the same editors and published in 1946 by the Princeton University Press. This volume covered the 9-year period between 1934, when the first was compiled, and March, 1943, listed almost 3,000 items, a phenomenal rise in that length of time. Bibliographies compiled by many different organizations now appear at regular intervals. The Public Library of Newark, New Jersey, through Marion C. Manley, business librarian, has a little bibliographical sheet, Business Literature, that keeps people informed of new books on public relations. The Cleveland Public Library Business Department offers the same service. Many professional and trade magazines carry book lists on the subject. Bibliographers like R. W. Bowker and H. W. Wilson Company list the titles of new books and other publications. The Special Libraries Association and the Library of Congress keep their subscribers informed of publications. The Public Opinion Quarterly keeps quarterly track of the literature. A recent bibliographical publication, issued by the F. W. Faxon Company of Boston, lists some 200 volumes with 400 references to our work in the field. Showing how the concept of public relations has spread, the works listed cover such varied topics as propaganda, publicity, advertising, politics, government, sociology, public administration, social psychology, business and finance, autobiography, biography, and even fiction and poetry. Examination of these volumes indicates how ideas overcome cultural lags and gain momentum as they spread. With developing recognition of the necessity for a broader point of view, books will become better integrated in their treatment of the subject. Social scientists recognize the importance of the field today, for we see an outcropping of their books dealing with public relations problems on an integrated basis. Forerunners of this type of book are Building a Popular Movement, a case study of the public relations of the Boy Scouts of America, by Harold P. Levy, and Mass Persuasion, The Social Psychology of a War Bond Drive by Robert K. Merton. These books analyze public relations problems from the standpoint of the social psychologist. They are true case studies and indicate the type of thinking that will undoubtedly be the basis for comparable approaches in a much wider range of problems. There is a growing mention in learned journals of the importance of public relations in serious literature, such as the comment of Carl I. Hovland in the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society in 1948, communication as an art has had a very long history. The writer, the orator, the public relations counsel and the advertiser have been practitioners of this art. Communication as a field of scientific inquiry has been of fairly recent origin. And then there are what might be called the raw material books for public relations, which provide the material for intelligent approaches. Increasing numbers are being published, for instance, Experiments on Mass Communication, sponsored by the Social Science Research Council. The Carnegie Foundation Inquiry on the Public Library considers the public library from the standpoint of its public, the profession, and its place in the social pattern. It analyzes the book industry and the information films from a real depth standpoint. Books on public relations published in foreign countries are fewer, but as far away as Sydney, Australia, some volumes are appearing. A recent one is Mightier Than the Sword, a handbook on public relations and its various allied fields. Books on public relations are also appearing in France, England, and other foreign countries. Periodical treatment of this dynamic field is requisite. In today's quickly changing, highly competitive world, periodicals weekly, monthly, and quarterly are needed to cover new developments in professions and vocations. 30 years ago, when we started, there was no periodical from which the public relations man could extract fact or point of view especially relevant to his work. That is no longer so. Ivy Lee, from 1918 to 1921, published notes and clippings. His Public Relations was published from 1921-25, and his Information from 1925-33. These sheets were sent to a selected list of individuals. From 1921 to 1929 we published, from time to time, a 4-page sheet called Contact, that was devoted to an interpretation of the profession of counsel on public relations. It circulated among group leaders and opinion molders, and at one time the circulation reached 15,000. We owe a great deal to Contact. Through it the subject of public relations was spread. It contained quotations and also references to the relationship of various activities to public relations. Despite these beginnings, it was not until 1937 that Public Opinion had a journal of its own. Then, under the editorship of DeWitt Clinton Poole and Harwood L. Childs of Princeton University, the Public Opinion Quarterly was founded. I talked with Professor Childs about the project and helped outline the field the quarterly would attempt to cover, urging that both theoretical and practical approaches to the problem of public relations be included. I also contributed an article to the first issue which indicated the status of the public relations field after 17 years. Since 1938, Channels, devoted to the public relations of health and welfare services, has been published by the National Publicity Council for Health and Welfare Services, and the American College Public Relations Association has issued a quarterly since 1949. In England, there was a periodical, Persuasion, which covers public relations, propaganda, advertising, and publicity. The Public Relations News, a 4-page weekly, in format like the Kipling or Washington Letter, is published in New York. Of course, the professional journals of the social sciences treat certain aspects of public relations. Certainly the Journal of Social Issues, published by the American Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, Human Relations, published by the Tavistock Institute of London, and etc. Review of General Semantics, published by the International Society for General Semantics should not go without mention. And there are the journals in publishing, advertising, and selling, which, antagonistic in the 20s, today are out and out friendly and devote increasing time and attention to the subject. The academic field, with rare exceptions, was not immediate in its grasp or perception of public relations. New York University, as I have stated, invited me to give the first course on the subject in 1923. Today interest has spread throughout the United States, and courses are being offered at many universities and colleges, and profit and non-profit groups have set up special conferences to deal with the subject. 14 years ago, according to a study we made then and published in a brochure entitled Universities Pathfinders in Public Opinion, there were only 3 courses that had public relations in their titles, one at Bucknell University, one at the College of the City of New York, and one at the University of Southern California. A recent study made by Alfred McClung Lee shows that in 1945, 21 universities offered courses in public relations. In 1947, 30 universities offered a total of 47 courses. 62 universities offered public relations courses in 1948, 20 offered courses in publicity. Only 5 had 5 or more courses in public relations or publicity. In 1950, the American Association of School Administrators devoted its entire 497-page yearbook to the treatment of public relations in the American school system, and many universities give complete courses in the subject. Background courses for public relations are listed in the 1950-51 catalog of the New School for Social Research. 6 courses are announced on the theory and principles of public relations, 10 courses on the techniques of public relations, 8 on the media and techniques of communication, and 6 under research and its problems. The City College of New York School of Business and Civic Administration announces comprehensive courses, and Boston University offers a degree in public relations in its School of Public Relations. Incidentally, the first Ph.D. degree in public relations was conferred by Columbia University in 1950, the recipient's thesis covering the field of insurance. Syracuse University conducts public relations courses for bankers in cooperation with the American Institute of Banking. As recently as 1939, public relations courses in which I participated first reached the West in summer courses arranged for laymen at Leland Stanford University, Reed College, and the University of Washington. The interest in public relations which I found in Hawaii on my 1950 visit was an eye-opener. It was as keen among graduates, undergraduates, and laymen as among leaders in social service, government, business, and non-profit organizations for whom I conducted a seminar during the summer. It is still a question just where public relations fits into the university and college curriculum. Sometimes it is put in journalism, other times in business or in economics, politics, or government. This interest of education in the field is echoed in publications of the American Academy of Political and Social Sciences. The earliest academic group I have been able to find interested in the subject was the Social Science Research Council, which in October 1931 gave recognition to increasing interests by appointing an advisory committee on pressure groups and propaganda. This committee was composed of Harold D. Laswell, University of Chicago, Chairman, Ralph D. Casey, University of Minnesota, H. E. Gosner, University of Chicago, Pendleton Herring and John D. Hicks, both of Harvard University, Peter H. Odegaard, Ohio State University, and Kimball Young, University of Wisconsin. The committee conducted hearings in which experts in the field participated, and also sponsored publications in the field, notably the two bibliographies previously mentioned. Universities have been open-minded in this period, but less so the encyclopedias and other reference books. They seem to have retained the idea of public relations as just a euphemism for press-agentry. An idea has to be shaken down pretty well before it is accepted by these reference guides and encyclopedias. They like to play safe and avoid sanctioning any idea not already fully established in the public mind. The 1951 printing of the Encyclopaedia Britannica among its thousands of items contains no article on public relations. 10 Eventful Years, published by the Encyclopaedia Britannica in 1947, included an article I wrote on public relations, the first treatment of the subject by the Britannica. The Encyclopaedia Americana, on the other hand, in its 1947 printing, published a 5-page article that recognized the field by defining it, discussing it, and appending a bibliography. This article was written by Reginald Clough, the editor of Tide, and was the first article on public relations to appear in this encyclopedia. The authoritative Encyclopedia of the Social Sciences, while it mentions Public Relations Council, does not include an entry that deals specifically with public relations. The nearest approach is Harold Laswell's mention in his article, Propaganda, in 1933. Although publicity, collective behavior, social process, public opinion, democracy, politics, lobby, interest, symbolism, education, press, radio, advertising, and social reform are all treated in special articles, there is no cross-reference to public relations. The Columbia Encyclopedia still contains no article on public relations, although it has carried an article on propaganda since 1935. Who's Who in America, in the 1950-51 volume, keynotes the present status of the Public Relations Council in the hierarchy of American group leaders and opinion molders, giving a quantitative and qualitative evaluation. This respected guidebook to American leadership analyzes for the first time in its history the vocations of those listed in the book by percentage and number to the total, including public relations. 81 Americans judged by Who's Who as Distinguished Americans are named under public relations, 81 out of a total of 40,500 individuals, 0.2% of the total. This compares with 0.5% for actors and actresses, 0.5% for diplomat, 0.1% for politicians, and 0.3% for publishers. Less in percentage than public relations experts are art patrons, club women, explorers, hospital officials, interior decorators, pharmacists, and statisticians. There are, however, more editors, 2.6%, authors, 3.2%, and lawyers, 7.1%. Public relations, according to this authoritative source, occupies an important place among the vocations in the United States. Another indication of the trend of public relations toward an honorable place among the vocations of distinguished persons is the inclusion of this field of activity in Who Knows and What, published in 1949. This Who's Who among the experts gives biographies of 23 persons whom it classifies under the heading of public relations. Just as the literature on public relations has undergone a metamorphosis, so has its treatment by the great media of communications, the daily and periodical press, the radio, the motion picture field, and even fiction. In the early 20s, as we have seen, public relations was considered a euphemism for press agentry, and press agentry was anathema to the newspapers, the battle against the press agent led by the American Newspaper Publishers Association. Not only was public relations seldom mentioned, but when it was mentioned sneeringly. Antipathy against space grabbers, possibly even jealousy of the high incomes the public relations expert usually earned, consigned him to passionate anonymity. There was an unwritten code that the names of public relations men, as well as their title, be dropped from even the legitimate news story. Today, the New York Times, a traditional pacemaker among American newspapers, boldly identifies the individual whose picture it runs as a man engaged in public relations and mentions public relations surveys, campaigns, and activities. Photographs are often run of public relations men appointed or elected to office in private or nonprofit organizations. News stories about public relations people and campaigns are treated on a parity with those of other vocations. Whatever reticence there is today, and there still is a slight self-consciousness about the newspaper's use of public relations news and public relations men, will undoubtedly break down in the near future. The magazines were the first medium to tell the public about the public relations man. In February 1930, the American Mercury ran a profile of Ivy Lee and later one of me, mass psychologist. The Atlantic Monthly in May 1932 contained a profile of me written by John T. Flynn and called Edward L. Bernays, The Science of Ballyhoo. The periodical press today accepts the public relations man as fully as other fields. The New Yorker and other magazines print profiles. The general magazines carry stories of his campaigns. Time and Newsweek discuss public relations activities in connection with stories they cover. The press campaigns against public relations carried on by Printers Inc., editor and publisher, and other comparable journals have often been replaced by special issues devoted to the public relations of their particular fields. The personalities of public relations men are becoming better known through various types of profiling. In the 3-year period, January 1946 to July 1949, the Biography Index reports 23 biographies of public relations people appearing in the publications of that period and 25 references to biographies of press agents. As for the magazines covering business, Business Week was really a forerunner in this field. It ran 2 full reports on public relations that stimulated great interest among businessmen, one in the issue of January 23, 1937, and another on October 1, 1939. Fortune pioneered when it ran its first broad article in March 1939, The Public is Not Damned, and then another in May 1949, Business is Still in Trouble. The latter article was heavily advertised and helped focus public attention on the subject. In 1950 this interest was further intensified through an additional series of articles on the communications field. The radio has hardly treated the subject at all. The town hall meeting of the air has included a number of topics covering public opinion and propaganda, but none on public relations, as far as I know. The University of Chicago Roundtable, similarly, has touched on propaganda, but not on public relations. The movies, to my knowledge, have paid little attention to the subject. The March of Time in November 1947 released a documentary public relations on the subject. But even here the editors were wary in moving too far ahead of the moviegoer's concept of public relations, and the main thesis of the story was old-time press-agentry, although it did include shots of professional public relations counsel. In fiction the public relations man has made more of a dent than in the movies. Public relations men have appeared in novels as principal characters, been referred to in detective stories, and been mentioned even in such books as Sinclair Lewis' It Can't Happen Here. Rian Berkovici wrote a novel, For Release, in which the principal character is a public relations man. Charles Yale Harrison told in Nobody's Fool a lurid tale of the doings of one public relations man. Rex Stout refers to public relations in his detective story, The Silent Speaker. But even today the subject is treated in a completely distorted fashion, as in Jeremy Kirk's The Build-Up Boys. It is not unusual for public relations experts to be honored by governments, universities, foundations, and other institutions in many varied ways. Several fellowships have also been awarded in the field, among them the Edward L. Bernays Foundation Fellowship in Applied Social Science at Cornell University for the year 1951-52. The great mass media newspapers, magazines, radio, television, and motion pictures, both as individual organizations and through trade associations, have acknowledged the impact of public relations and now often have public relations men on their staff or retain them as counsel. We ourselves have been retained over the years by such organizations as the Columbia Broadcasting System, National Broadcasting Company, McCall's Magazine, Time Incorporated, Curtis Publishing Company, Brooklyn Daily Eagle, and Fox Film Corporation. We mention them only to indicate that even the corporate structure engaged in mass communications is now keenly aware of the value of getting professional advice and enabling it to deal more effectively with the public on a two-way basis. This same recognition has, of course, led to the retention of public relations counsel or the appointment of public relations directors by the great trade associations of the country, both in their general problems and in specific competitive situations. Recognition has also come from labor organizations, which today make use of public relations extensively. CIO President Philip Murray has said, The CIO welcomes the constant scrutiny of its aims and the means it uses. The development of increasingly responsible leadership in both labor and management will increase public confidence. We in the CIO do not tolerate racketeers. We publish our financial statements, we are constantly developing more and better trained leaders, we support hundreds of training schools and institutes for our members, we employ technicians from outside our ranks who have given us valuable assistance since the formation of the CIO, we believe we have a program which is of interest to all the component parts of our society. We are doing all we can to present that program to the nation. We use the labor press, pamphlets, radio, mailing lists, personal contacts, every device known to the expert in public relations. The CIO and the AFL both carry on public relations activities. The CIO publishes many pamphlets and a weekly newspaper, gives out news releases, participates in network radio programs, and once a year uses the springboard of a national convention to present its point of view to America. The American Federation of Labor carries on comparable activities. A union industry show put on at large halls in Cincinnati, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Philadelphia dramatizes products made by the AFL. Outstanding among labor bodies engaged in public relations activities are the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union, working on a national and local level, and the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. The Textile Workers Union and the United Automobile Workers of America carry on regular activities. The United Mine Workers of America employ a New York public relations firm to handle their national news bureau. Labor's political education is carried on in the AFL. The National Labor Service is supported by CIO and AFL Wages War Against Intolerance. Money-wise, in 1947 the American Federation of Labor spent more than $750,000 to try to defeat the Taft-Hartley Act. Religious bodies, social service organizations, racial and other groups recognize the importance of engaging public relations counsel, as do professional organizations of doctors, lawyers, engineers, and others. It is unnecessary, really, to stress the recognition that has come to public relations from finance, commerce, and industry, which is possibly greater than from any other sources. Corporations today recruit top officials from the public relations field. Many executives of large corporations were formerly in public relations. Corporations pay public relations officers salaries in line with those of other executives, and fees to counsel on public relations in line with attorneys' fees. Advertising agencies have public relations vice presidents. Public relations research organizations offer special researches in public relations. As an example of these, Elmo Roper, in his Interviewer's Handbook 1949, describes one of his services as follows. Public relations is a relatively new term. Corporations have become increasingly concerned about their standing in the eyes of the public just as politicians have always been. The Public Relations Counsel, who is the expert in advising companies how to act so as to deserve the public's confidence, needs some facts to go on. He needs to know how his client does stand with people and why that standing is good or bad. He needs to know what people want and expect from business enterprises beyond good products and values. Public relations research tries to get the answers to these questions. The Elmo Roper firm does a constantly increasing amount of this type of research for its clients. It is impossible to tell how many men and women are engaged in public relations in government at national, state, and city levels because often the function is described by some other name. But we can get some estimate of the personnel engaged in the activity on the national level and the sum of money spent on it, as well as look at the record to find the description of services. The Bureau of the Budget report of activities considered as public relations and publicity included the following: preparation of material for newspapers, periodicals, and other non-federal publications, distributing press releases and interviewing representatives of the press, preparation of material for broadcasting and contacts with broadcasting representatives, preparation of advertisements, paid or free, except advertising relating to the acquisition or disposal of government property, preparation, installation, and circulation of exhibits, production of motion pictures and film strips, except those for internal use in the government, and preparation of publications neither required by law nor issued primarily for internal use in the government. Excluded from consideration was the time of employees whose work is devoted to publications required by law, for example, annual reports, farmers' bulletins, internal revenue decisions, and other publications of this type, or those primarily for use within the government, the answering of correspondence from the public, and the issuance of interpretations on regulations. In 1948 the estimated full-time employees engaged in this field in government were 2,232, the part-time, 1,212, with a combined annual salary of $13,043,452. This had increased by 1949 to full-time, 2,423, part-time, 1,243, with an annual salary of $13,539,008. World War II undoubtedly greatly accelerated the growth of public relations departments in government service. In the Office of War Information alone, a giant public relations service of the government, there was a staff of 5,693. A study of the U.S. Government Organization Manual, 1950-51 leaves no doubt that public relations activities have a key place at highest policy levels in research on public attitudes, development of public policy and practice, and planned approaches. The widespread functions may be indicated by examining just a few. In the Department of State, the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs advises the Secretary and other high officials of the department on public opinion affairs as they relate to the development of foreign policy. He supervises the dissemination of information designed to keep the American public informed on international affairs. The Office of Public Affairs develops and conducts programs to keep the American public informed on international affairs, and keeps the department informed on American public opinion. This office includes the Division of Public Liaison, which maintains relations with private groups, organizations, and individuals interested in international affairs, provides information and consultative services, and arranges for the presentation of their views to the department. In the Department of Defense, the Office of Public Information is responsible for the development and establishment of public relations policies and practices for that department. It is responsible for the dissemination of military information to the public, liaison with other government agencies on matters of mutual interest in the field of public relations, and the coordination and supervision of procedures within the field commands of several services. The Department of the Navy has its Office of Public Relations. The Department of Justice has a Director of Public Relations. The Department of the Interior lists, under its Office of the Secretary, a Division of Information. The Director of Information is responsible for a unified, effective departmental information program and policy. The Division of Information has technical supervision over all information activities of the department's bureaus and offices. It arranges for the coordination, supervision, and dissemination of useful information on the economic research, service, construction, conservation, utilization, and other programs of the department as they relate to the public interest and the nation's natural resources. The division provides information service for newspapers, press associations, magazines, radio networks and stations, motion picture companies, and other media or individuals concerned with the department's activities. The Department of Agriculture had its Office of Information provided for as early as 1913. The General Services Administration maintains an Office of Public Information and reports responsible for the initiation, development, and direction of the public relations and information programs of the General Services Administration. It is the central point for the coordination and dissemination of public information and reports, prepares and distributes news stories and other informational releases for the press and wire services, and provides technical supervision over and assists all field offices with public information programs and problems of local or regional interest. Outside the field of government, the National American Red Cross has a Vice President for Public Relations, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, a Director of Public Relations, and the International Monetary Fund, a Director, Office of Public Relations. Internationally, of course, the Voice of America is our government's recognition of the vital role of public relations in our foreign affairs. The large amount of money spent on the effort indicates the importance attached to it. Within the United Nations, there is an Assistant Secretary General in charge of public information, with a director and office in addition. Many of the recently formed governments plunged into public relations as a first step. In 1949, immediately after Indonesia had declared its independence, a young man appeared in our office presenting a card, Sukarno, Department of Public Relations, Indonesian Republic.